maybe I'll help you with this one. So I'll just do a quick roll call. Nolan, here. Alyssa?
Here.
Okay. Michael?
Yes.
Lois?
Here.
Lindsay? No. Tasha?
Here.
Lindy is excused. Jonathan?
Here.
Carla?
Here.
Jed?
Yep.
And Jimmy. I expect Jimmy to arrive, so we'll be looking forward to him. Okay, thank you.
All right. So I think we've got a pretty full agenda today because we're going to be, so we're going to be hearing from the assessor's office, and we've also got the resolution to approve.
Mhm.
And then we've got a school district report we're fitting in as well, I think, and a little bit of an update from you.
Yes, I think on the agenda, we sent out the alcohol tax. That one went around. The school district one, I got a recent one from the school district. They modified it. I just gave it to you. You guys haven't had a chance to see that, so if you don't act on it today, we'll work a different plan. And then Jack Gadamus from the property appraisal will give you a rundown of their recent report. And then the other reports will be very short and sweet. So on the first item, Mr. Chairman, on the action items, I think at our last meeting, we talked about your draft strategy report for 2019. You did not have a quorum. I think there was some questions about they wanted to, you guys as the group, I think Lindy was managing the meeting for you, or Alyssa was. I don't have clarity if you've actually accepted the draft report and the priorities that you have on there, and if you had any significant changes you wanted to move forward with. And I just need to know if the draft we put together and the stages we want to do it is a good place to start for 19. And if you have any significant changes among the body, then we'll make them. Otherwise, I'd like some guidance as to make sure that what we prepared was a good place to start, the priorities are the right, the quotas are right, and then the issues that you brought together are on track. So the body didn't say, yeah, that looks good. Go forward. So I'd like something from you guys.
Yeah, Mike. And I'm assuming that's something that we can amend as the year goes on.
Yeah,
So
it's your
not-
work program
yeah,
is
it's a work
basically what it
program.
is.
So I would move that we adopt the strategic plan.
Discussion?
Any other?
Was it sent out to us?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, there must be something going on. Did I answer? I don't think I did. There must be something going on with my email because I'm not getting.
Well, it's not.
Okay.
I didn't resend it. I didn't resend it for this meeting, Carla, but I resent it. I sent it to you for your February meeting
Okay.
after the January, and
Okay,
I think I
thank
brought
you.
some
Sorry.
copies.
I've got so much on my mind. I'm very sorry about that.
That's okay.
But I want to put it because I don't remember reading it.
Is there other discussion on it?
I think one thing that's not on there that I think we will need to we'll need to devote some time to is the impact of the governance budget. So I think that
Okay.
I mean whether we amend it now or later, I think we will need to amend it. I think we can go ahead and adopt it now and then go from there. That way we have that way it's done and we can move on.
Yeah.
And then just amend. So that would just be my comment really.
I'm inclined to agree with that. I mean, I think we should treat it as something that we revisit and update, and then in the spirit of that, I think
Okay.
I favor adopting it. Should we go to a vote on it?
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody have any objections or anybody opposed?
I just because I haven't read it and I can't find it, Lance. I'm
Okay.
sorry. So
You send it to her.
won't matter if I object. I'll abstain.
Sure. All right. Well, I think the motion carries then.
And the next item, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item you have is a draft alcohol tax, and thank you, everyone, for your comments on the process in which we did that. I might want to do it a little bit differently based on some guidance from the clerk. But all of you, thank you for your thoughts. So the one that you have that we passed around to you is the latest edited version. I believe it has some of Michael's edits, Alyssa's edits. Jonathan or Nolan had some edits in there. So it's the content, I think, is pretty much the same from the draft that I sent out, if you read that, but the organization and the layout is the same. And just to summarize, basically, it's a resolution from the Budget Advisory Commission supporting and commending the Assembly and the Administration's efforts to propose an alcohol tax for the following reasons. And those reasons are kind of laid out in the presentation that Ona Browse gave to you. And so I think with your edits, I think it meets the spirit of what the discussion that you had, the questions that you had for Ms. Browse. While I haven't seen and heard a similar resolution just was passed by the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation of a similar vein, they didn't take action prior to it being passed by the Assembly, but they took action basically saying it's a good thing and it's a reasonable approach to meet the needs of the community. So anyway, thanks to the committee members for giving us some guidance on that. So we look for your support on this resolution as amended by the members.
Has everyone had a chance to read the resolution? And I know it got passed around. It seemed like we did have some comments on it, and then I know Lois and I think Tasha had some late tweaks to it as well. Yes.
I just wanted to speak the late tweak. It doesn't go to the substance at all. It was just a few editorial missing word in one place and things like that. And I did send it to Nolan. I was kind of waiting until everyone else to see if they would catch it. But then when it came around as final, I noticed that some of these things were still missing. And I just talked to Lance about it, and he said if it's just administrative, there's no problem with making those edits before you, as chair, sign it.
Good. Yeah, I think that's good. Good comment.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move that we move this to the floor for a vote. So I guess I'm motioning that we adopt this.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right.
Just a comment, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman. To Lois's point, and maybe Tasha, if you guys have some administrative changes, I misspelled the word there or content. If it's not, if you want to add those, we can do that. I'll make them. I'll send them to you. You sign it. We're done.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's good then. So,
So I will send you a copy of what I sent Nolan, and then I think we need to discuss your.
Right. So my
Okay.
suggestion was in like the second whereas from the bottom, where it's talking about the Anchorage Safety Patrol. In the brackets, it says currently limited to downtown, Midtown, Mountain View, and Fairview areas. But if you go to their website, it says that it covers like a vast area, but it primarily serves these areas. And so I just wanted to take out that whole bracketed statement.
So I would withdraw my motion because we're now.
I don't think you can. It's seconded and it's on the
It's been
floor.
seconded? Okay.
Yeah.
No, you can't, but you can make an
You can make an amended motion, right?
And then we
Yeah,
vote on
move
the
to-
amendment.
You can amend the
Mhm.
resolution.
Okay.
so want to make an
then
amendment
it'll
then
come
to
back.
make that
Yeah.
addition or to make that change to strike out that parenthetical?
So she needs to make the motion.
Do you want to make a motion?
Yep. I make a motion that we edit the resolution about the alcohol tax to remove the parenthetical in regards to the Anchorage Safety Patrol.
So, are you going to second?
Second.
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to say that the maker of the original motion considers that to be a friendly amendment.
There's no such thing.
No such thing anymore, okay. All right. Council process slightly different than, Pacific Management Council process slightly different than here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so do we vote on the amendment and then the
Yeah.
resolution?
Mhm.
All right,
All right.
so on the amendment, any opposition? And on the resolution? Any opposition?
Yeah, I'd like discussion really quick, if that's okay, because since it's on the floor. So initially, I was kind of for this, just as a knee-jerk reaction. And I know it's not going to make a difference because I know I'm not going to change anyone's mind here. But this kind of reminds me of SB 91 in a way, of the fact that the legislature had what they thought was a brilliant idea, but then they had no plan with the money that they thought they were going to save by reducing sentences and all these things. They had no plan. I kind of see this as the same way. I mean, yeah, we say, hey, we're going to do this and this and this with the money. But is there really a good plan in place? I don't know. To tell you the truth, I'm not sure. But what I do know is that those that are profiting from selling to chronic inebriates have no, not being slapped on the wrist for anything. Who's being slapped on the wrist is those of you that just like to have a nice glass of wine before you go to bed. You're being taxed for them being irresponsible maybe in the way they sell. You're being taxed for people being irresponsible in the way they consume and what they do. To me, I'm never for taxes. I'm always for less government. I'm absolutely not for a tax that's forced onto people. So I'm not going to vote for this. I'm not going to support this. I really think there's other ways. As hopeless as it looks, I do think there are other ways that we could have approached this as a city and as a community. So,
Other discussion on that? Yes.
So, kind of in the same vein as that, I have mixed feelings about telling people how I personally stand on the alcohol tax. But then I was like, okay, what's this resolution actually asking for? And it just is like, thanks for putting it on the ballot, right? So then I kind of withdrew that kind of distancing myself from it a bit. I'm like, okay, this, I frequently hear that comment in my community council, like, why aren't they bringing these things to a vote of the people? So this I appreciate.
Yes, Lois.
So Carla, I have a question. Listening to what you said, it does, I think some of your concerns might have been at least partially addressed because they do talk about identifying and tracking the funds in a separate pool. So it's not going into, you know, a general revenue way. So I do think there's some way to be sure, some check on how it's being spent.
do we have Eric, can you show up? I agree with you on that. Once again, I think even at the state level, they identified what they were going to use the funds for, but then they didn't put the programs in place. And so here they're identifying what they want to use them for, but are they, I mean,
So can I follow up on that? One is that the state has constitutional restrictions around creating dedicated funds with
Right.
tax revenue. So the muni does not have similar ones, if I have that correct.
You're correct.
no,
So that's a big-
I do
that's a huge
understand that.
distinction
What
right
I'm
there.
saying is it's all good in theory, but I would have liked to have seen, and maybe there is, a good plan. We need $3 million to do this. We need $5 million to do this. Instead, we say 5% across the board. Now we got 13 million. What can we do with it?
Yeah, and I appreciate your view on the tax itself, but this resolution isn't about supporting the tax. All this resolution says, we commend you for taking it to the people. That's all it says. It doesn't say, I'm gonna vote for it, I'm gonna vote against it. All this says is, thanks for taking it to the
Then
people.
why do it?
Well, we don't have to. It makes no difference
Okay.
at all. So that's, I mean, it doesn't have any substantive issue other than us saying, hey, you are gonna be, you wanna introduce a new tax, thanks for taking it to the people to vote rather than being forced down my throat. So, I mean, that's all it's saying. It doesn't mean you approve of the tax itself or the plan, the lack of plan for it, however you would want to look at it. It's just saying, hey, thanks for taking it to the people. If we don't pass it, it doesn't change anything.
Understood.
If
I
we
just
pass
don't
it,
want
it
to
doesn't change anything.
pat anybody on the back for, putting a tax on the people, so.
And other comments, or are we ready to take it to a vote?
And thank you all for listening.
Thank you. Other comments, or are we ready to move on to a vote? All right, do we hear, actually, I can make a motion to adopt the resolution.
Motion's already on the table.
Jonathan made it.
Okay,
Just got
opposition.
sidetracked.
Carla.
And then I think it carries. Very good. So, next up then we have the ASD school the Anchor School District budget resolution.
So I'm going to start this one briefly, and then I'll let Andy or Jim jump in. I asked them to draft a resolution, but the model that I gave them was the model like the gas tax, and so I asked them to reformat that in the last couple days, or the last day. And anyway, they prepared this thing here. You guys have not had a chance to look at this. This is based a summary of what you guys saw of Andy's presentation last week on their draft budget, which was given to the Assembly Tuesday night, and there is a public hearing on the 19th. So if you have two options, you can take a look at it now and see if this is something that you want to support, and if you have significant changes, we'll work a similar process. But I appreciate it.
I'm going to say, been able to do resolutions pretty successfully by email before. I'm gonna say that because of time being crunched here and the presentations that we've got, I'm gonna suggest that we handle this by email if we can.
Okay.
Mike?
Yeah, what's the time frame on the assembly voting on this? I don't want to, again, go to a situation where we're post.
They're gonna vote on the 19th. Public hearing and vote on the 19th,
So that gives us, yeah, it's 12 days away.
2 weeks.
Can we send the resolution if we haven't passed it?
Mhm.
Like, we can do it by email, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we can write it, but then we would be, like Mike said, in the same situation where we're sending this, we're not gonna approve it until our next meeting.
Well, no, we can approve it by email.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk to the clerk on the message on how we do that. There's a process in which you can actually do that.
Yeah.
We will have to edit the resolution in a different process in which you vote on the resolution.
Well,
So we can do it.
Because we did our last budget resolution in November or December, we did by email.
Correct.
So we've done that, yeah. Yes,
So,
Jonathan?
Mr. Chairman, I'm fully supportive of the idea of passing this around and voting by email if necessary. I do want to call attention to the fifth whereas down where it says, the district is subject to a cap by the state on how much funding the municipality can contribute. Anchorage has continued to provide the full amount of support allowed by state law for many years. So as I think many of us know, there's a minimum required local contribution of 2.65 mils of property tax value. And the state actually caps the maximum amount of millage that you can apply towards education. I think that.
In the
correct?
general fund, but not capital or transportation
Right.
or
Right.
any of the other funds.
In terms of general funding, right. And my understanding is that was put in place to to limit the distance between haves and have-nots.
Right, equity within.
Equity within Alaska. That being said, as Anchorage has been wealthy enough and able to tax ourselves to the maximum millage rate for the general fund, we're in a position where we simply can't make up the state's cuts.
We're not
But
allowed to.
We're not allowed to. So we just have to take it in the teeth. And so I appreciate that language being in here to remind everyone that, one, this community has always supported education to the maximum millage possible for the general fund. And the fact that we just simply do not have significant adaptive measures to this beyond fundamentally restructuring our school system. And what that means is increasing class sizes. And as both a member of the community and a parent, I am very much opposed to increasing class sizes because we know empirically that larger class sizes inhibit learning. We know it. It's not debatable. So with that, I'll get off my soapbox, but to say that when we go through the process, that I very much appreciate the appearance of that whereas in the resolution.
Lois?
So I have a related point which I'll raise as a question because it's harder to do this by email, but we don't mention the potential for state budget cuts in this resolution at all, and so you have to know a lot to understand what you just pointed out just about on that. So
We could
I
give you an
guess-
assessment. We've done a 1%, 5%, and the governor's cut assessments of how the district would be impacted. But as Jonathan brought out, if it's the general fund, which is really where the governor has hit, if they reduce state revenue, because Anchorage has always done the max contribution, then the local would naturally drop. As the state drops, the local will drop outside of capital, transportation, or student nutrition.
No, I think I understand all that. I guess my question was going to be, there's no whereas
Yeah,
that
it-
addresses.
Oh.
We did include the bond debt as the last whereas.
Right.
I
as
saw
that
that,
will
but
eliminate-
again, it doesn't directly address, it doesn't
It's-
state that it's connected, so you have to
Okay.
have a level of understanding. So I'm
We
wondering.
can certainly update those to include those.
Well, I'm wondering if I assume you've
We're
thought
certainly not
about
opposed
whether
to
there's
it.
any whereas that makes sense to include, and I'm guessing you decided not to
We
include
wrote this
anything
pretty
directly?
quickly.
Okay.
Well, we don't want to make it offensive. I mean, I don't think most people have ever seen a governor's budget go all the way through with no changes. And and I don't know that this early in the process, we haven't seen any amendments yet to the governor's proposed budget. I was in Juneau Tuesday. It looks like the House wants to have their budget done by the end of March, hand it over to the Senate. The Senate's working on their version now, and their goal is to go into caucus by the end of April. And because there aren't any amendments, we didn't know, how much do you slam one person's proposal when we haven't seen the legislature yet? So it was kind of intentional because we know it's changing after all of my conversations. There's no stomach for that initial proposed budget, at least in education. But we don't know what they're going to come up with yet.
Okay, hang on a second. I think we have Mike next and then Tasha.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm not sure it's appropriate because it hasn't happened. I mean, every year there could be potential budget cuts.
Of course, I
Yeah,
understand
and-
that, but we could, I'm bringing up the general point, is there a need to make any sort of either a whereas or a connection of these statements to the budget?
Well, the budget's gonna be passed before the state budget's passed, right? So there's.
Right.
Yeah.
Many months.
Yeah.
But we don't wanna look like we have our head in the sands either.
Also, FY20's statewide school district budgets have already been, they were forward funded in the last session, is that correct? So if the legislature declines to act, there's no grounds for the governor to veto anything, and the governor's.
Correct. For the House Bill 287,
Right.
if the legislature doesn't change it, then there's nothing to line item.
Right.
For the other cuts to the deed budget and all other budgets, if the legislature doesn't come up with a balanced budget that goes to the governor, it's free reign for line item.
Okay. Good clarification. Tasha?
So I just was gonna comment that our resolution is to the Anchorage Assembly, and they're familiar, and maybe this is just a good reminder for them that we are taxing at the full amount for the local level and the impacts the state budget could have, and that maybe going into that clarification of explanation might not be needed for that audience.
I agree, it is to them, but all these documents are used by the public and need to be understood by the public. So if we think it's a good idea to make that connection, then we should do it, but, and it was really meant as a question to you guys. If everybody seems to think it's not important to make a connection, then I'm comfortable with that.
Right, and this is your resolution ultimately. and
We were
we'll
uncomfortable
help you draft
losing
whatever
it.
language you want to put in there.
What did you
We
say?
didn't want it to look rude coming from us writing it for you. It seemed inappropriate for us to put that in. If obviously if the committee wants to add it, I have no
Right.
issue with that, but I didn't want to force what appeared to be a personal thing on a document we wrote for you.
So why don't, we'll send this to you electronically, let you guys chew on it, and then you guys can, once you get it cleaned up, when you're happy with it, we'll send it out, you guys vote, we'll have it done in 12 days.
Sounds good. Can you make a quick comment? Can you keep it quick comment?
That was my comment.
Okay, good. Good. All right. Then I think with that we can move on to property appraisal.
So I'd like to introduce Jack. Jack is new to, well, he's not new to the municipality, but he's new to the position. Man, that is bad, I can't remember. Brent. No, Brian. So anyway, this is a report for new members. This is a report that I think is very valuable and informative to the Budget Advisory Commission. For new members who haven't seen it, this report is a very key, it's a high interest to members outside the Budget Advisory Commission, but it's also a key component when we prepare the budget. I think the property appraisal does a great job doing their analysis, and they have some amazing pictures in here. So I'm just going to turn it over to Jack, and he can.
Pictures.
I know.
We try to be dazzling. Again, yeah, my name is Jack Damus. Thank you for your time. So I will try to just bang through these as quickly as I can. If you do have any questions, it's a quick question, I'll certainly stop and let you ask it. Otherwise, you can save it to the end.
Send it to the team.
And with that, we'll just get going. So really, the first thing I want to talk about is what we do with property appraisal. And so this is just giving you a timeline of our kind of our cycle throughout the year. Really, is two things at the bottom that you need to be concerned about. What we deal with really is we deal with administrative exemptions, and we also do evaluation. So year-round, we're looking at exemptions. Also, we do inspections by state statute. We are required to inspect property every 6 years. So if you see one of our people at your property, that's probably what we're doing. So as far as the calendar, January 1st, that's our snapshot, that's our lien date. That's when all the value is assessed. And so what that really does is that kicks off our appeal season. And our appeal season generally starts about January 15th and ends about June, early June. Then from there, we start to get into our valuation analysis where we start to look at the next year. So this year in 2019, we'll be looking for tax year 2020. Finally, towards the end of the year, we also pick up new construction. So anything that has happened throughout the year, we will be picking that up.
Questions on the way or at the end?
If it's quick,
It says appeals on, if you go on your website, it says no appeals after, what, February 28th?
So the deadline for appeals has passed already. It's February 14th. Late file appeals, request for late file is March 18th. But the appeals, that's the window to appeal, but then we are going to be working those appeals
Gotcha, okay.
later on. So it's really looking at the staff perspective. All right, so acreage, the valuation, what is it? So really, it's almost 2,000 square miles is really the municipality. The acreage goes as far north as Eklutna, all the way down to Portage. Interesting here, really the purple is where the heart of the value is. So total value for this year, $46 billion. But that's not really the entire story. Taxable value, very important to distinguish those two. That drops down to about $35 billion. And the reason, I'm sure, as you all know, property taxes, it's important. It supports about more than half of the operating budget. Last year, 2018, property taxes accounted for about $549 million, which was school as well as operating budget. So, let's kind of dive into this just a little bit more as far as looking at what the total value is, comparing it to taxable value. So what is it really comprised of? So majority of the value, over 56%, is residential when you look at the total value. And then commercial, 23, personal property at 6, and then the two yellows, those are really fully exempt property. And that's going to be your government and non-government, for example, churches, charitable, etc. Now, the picture changes again a little bit more as far as when you look at the taxable property, removing those exemptions, also removing partial exemptions, for example, the residential exemption. Residential now is comprised of 61%, 31% for commercial, and then personal property at 8%. Yes.
And personal property in acreage is defined as?
A whole bunch of stuff. So the main thing that's comprised of is going to be your business accounts. So essentially inventory.
Okay.
That's the heart of it, and you'll see a slide on that.
Okay.
So before we, I would just want to spend a little bit of time on exemptions because they are really actually a big component and again a big part of what we do with property appraisal. Just a hair under a quarter of the total value is exempt. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. What is that all comprised of? Now at the top here I have split between mandatory and optional. Mandatory is by state, what's required by state. And you can see that senior disabled veterans, that's about $2.3 billion in exempt value. And then a lot of the other big dollars, municipality, education, federal, those are mostly government then. And then I want to also look at the optional, the local. So the residential exemption, that was a couple of years ago, 10% up to $20,000. That has got pushed up now to 20% up to $50,000. So that actually took a big jump in the total. Right now, it looks like it's about $2.1 billion in exempt value. So, not only talking about value, but I also want to just take a little bit of a minute here talking about the exemption review. So last couple of years, we've been doing an exemption review where we look at exemptions, see what the applicant is, are they still qualified for it? If it looks like maybe things are not matching up, we'll flag it for review, contact the individual, and what we do is we actually look at not just the last year, but we actually look at the last 6 years for their qualification. We just did about 1,100, I think it was 1,150 to be exact, last year, exemption statuses, and that resulted in about $56 million in So one of the big things with this is we're just trying to be equitable. That's a big thing to note. So I'm going to get into the market, new construction, so really kind of assess values, at least for this year, for tax year 2019. So first thing I'm going to talk about, new construction, what happened with it this year. Residential is about $134 million, up about 8% compared to last year. And then commercial, $113 million, and it's up about 18% compared to last year, for a total of overall up 12%. As far as commercial is just, that's a little bit more volatile from year to year. This year there's been a few big projects that really came and bumped it up. For example, the Alaska Airlines hangar, that's a big one. The Oldham Distribution Center, so that can change a little bit. But I also want to put the new construction in perspective. So you're like, oh wow, it's up 12%, it's amazing. Well, just a small historical context, only going back from 2006 to today, 2019. The last, early 2000s is higher. Obviously, if you look at the houses built like in the 80s, we were way more. But the main point I really want to show is that, yeah, we're up 12%, but in relative perspective, it's still nothing, major increase. I hope that puts it into perspective a little bit. So let's look at the values. First thing to note here, I just want to pay attention, this includes new construction. Residential, one of the things I really like to focus on, the change is 2.2%, $26 billion, and about 86,000, almost 87,000 parcels. Commercial, up 1.9% this year. We have about 10,600 records for that too. And then personal property here, we have a little asterisk here because really that's last year's value. We don't really get, the business property is just starting to file now, so we won't really start to know what's going on for the changes until in a couple of months. So, next thing I want to talk about though is existing property. So this is removing new construction and to change it a little bit as far as the picture. This is the one that I really like to focus on when I present to community councils, because this really is what affects and impacts them. Residential up 1.7% this year, commercial up 0.8%. And then as far as the economic influences to value, so when we look at and value property, we look at a bunch of data. But I just want to talk about a few just kind of really high-level indicators here. What I thought was interesting. And so the first one that I really thought interesting is interest rates up a little less than 1% this last year. I don't know about you, but I kept hearing that the Feds are going to keep raising interest rates, and finally they did move it a little bit. The other interesting thing too is inflation was up 2%. So the last several years we've been bumping around 0.5% inflation, something relatively low. And since last year, it's been interesting to see that that's finally kicking up. Yes.
Anchorage CPI or US All Urban, or what's your?
This, I believe, is the Anchorage. It's now changed. It's CPI, but I think it's all cities now, or urban. I think it changed recently.
Right. But it's the Anchorage. It's the Anchorage metric. Okay.
Yeah. And then also interesting, it looks like that income is going to be also up similar to inflation. I haven't gotten any hard numbers on that, but it does look like that's quite promising with that. So that's also good. The kind of bottom three here, I kind of segregated them. The bottom three is kind of more just painting a light at the end of the tunnel. Mind you, when we created this was kind of January 1st. There's obviously news that has changed since then, but jobs, yes, we're still in recession. Jobs are declining, but they're declining at a declining rate. So that is a little bit positive there. The other thing is the AEDC consumer optimism. That definitely jumped up this last year, and I thought that was really interesting. And then we've also been kind of hearing some news about how the recession maybe will be ending sometime this year. So, mind you, just because we ended the recession does not mean we recovered either. Right? There's a big distinction there. But I'm going to move away now from just kind of some really high over level data that we saw. And I'm going to really now just talk quickly about how the tax system works with Anchorage. If you know this, great. If you don't, I know I've certainly learned this as well. But a lot of times what I hear when I was an analyst is people come to the counter and say, hey, you're just trying to raise revenue when you by raising the value of property. It's like, well, no. In fact, hypothetically, in an overly simplistic method, we could double the assessed value of everybody and no one would pay additional taxes. So how does that really happen? So again, like I said, there's two things that property appraisal does, right? We're not trying to raise more revenue. We're not trying to collect the taxes. All we do is we value the property and we administer exemptions to essentially derive the taxable value. So then how do we deal with getting a budget going? Well, the first thing that really happens is right here at the top. Really, it's the mayor that provides a preliminary budget, and then goes to the assembly. So a work session kind of happens, and then sometime in December, the budget gets approved, and then there's the quarter budget revisions kind of towards getting ready to vote now. So really, that's the top of the equation. So basically, the approved budget becomes what we would deem taxable, the revenue. Meanwhile, at least in our little division in the world, this really makes my job look easy. We're working with personal property valuation. We're also working with the land improvement, so basically the real property side, trying to find valuation. And then again, we're administering exemptions, so we're reducing the total value, reducing those exemptions to find the total taxable value. So all you have then is a simple equation where you have your total tax revenue to get, which was from the budget, divided by your total taxable value, which we already discussed, and you get what your mill rate is. So, in a very simplistic thing, we have $527 million to collect. We have $36 billion in taxable value, and your tax rate is 14.6 mils, or essentially effective of 1.4%. So you take that to a $300,000 home, and your tax liability would be about $43.80. Hypothetically, if we doubled the value of everybody, ceteris paribus, again, this is overly simplistic, all things equal, we would have the same $527 million to collect, $72 billion, now doubled of taxable value for a magical 7.3 cut in half tax rate. So take that 7.3 times your now doubled value of 600, and you have the same tax rate. So I always thought that it was interesting. Let's move on. So I want to talk about residential property now a little bit. I got a few slides in residential property, commercial, personal property, and then just kind of a few little addendum items. Again, up 2.2%. 2019 it was $26 billion. Again, that 2.2 includes new construction. Now, in the overall change, when you start to look at that, here it's kind of separated by property type. So single family up about 1.9%. This one does not include new construction. Again, this is existing property. Duplex, triplex up very similar at 1.7. Vacant land, we certainly did some movement there this year. I don't think it was so much by market as much as just really looking at some of our data and profiles. It's different.
I have a question. How is there a change in vacant land? I mean, it seems like there's a set amount of land every year.
Yeah, so like I said, I don't think 3% is really the market. It's us looking at things, profiling, and saying, you know, maybe the properties that we have profiled in Girdwood, comparing it to, like, for example, in Indian, we're saying, you know, maybe they're different. Maybe Indian's more behaves more like the hillside, and so then we start to profile.
I got it. You're talking about value change. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the thing. There's a big distinction between what the value changes by the market and then what we've done as far as that goes, and sometimes that's really blurs too, for sure. But within average changes, as I'm sure you know, average changes is just the average. So there's going to be higher or lower than whatever you said percent is. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but two primary drivers to the variance of the change, of the average change, is either by location and or by property type. So for example, these top here that are not the geographic, downtown was pretty flat this last year. Hillside, we kicked up a little bit, 2.5%. And then also by the global here, so like again, the duplex, triplex up 1.7. Condos were a little bit variance as well. One went down 9.8%.
And are you not including any earthquake-related adjustments with any of this stuff, or?
Most of this does not reflect earthquake adjustments, but I got some slides on that towards the end, discussing the earthquake adjustments.
Okay, so some of these numbers would be different.
They certainly could be. It's going to be about 30 million, I think, so far that we have as far as adjusted so far for that. So 30 million of the 26 billion of, well, 36 billion so far. So.
Okay.
Residential data. So one of the biggest things that we do is we track data. We track listings. So this last year we tracked about 3,000 listings. We're a non-disclosure state. About 3,000 sales occurred in 2018, and about 30% of those were disclosed to us. So we use actually 3 years of sales when we analyze our data for residential, and this is about a little under 4,000 sales that we utilized for the valuation this year. So looking at some of the ratios, this is definitely some of the things that, as the assessor, what we're concerned about is just how well are we doing with our valuations compared to the sales and listings. So the top one here is the list, 92%, so that's generally right where we want to be. Obviously, people list their home usually ending with a price that's a little bit lower. This bold one here in the middle, 96%, so that's the sales that were disclosed to us divided by the sale price. That's generally, again, right where we want to be, is the 96% range. And then this bottom one, just really comparing to the MLS average sale price, which is kind of more just an interesting fact, but there's certainly some variance between that. But 96% is certainly not bad. Moving on to commercial. So again, overall change, 1.9%. That includes new construction, so $10.7 billion worth of it. Here it is looking at by property type. Fourplex up about 2.3% this year. And then apartments up about 1.8. The one to highlight here, hotels are down almost 6%. That's largely due to our methodology in conjunction with declining income as far as the income approach. So that's the main driver behind that. Also, we use sales for commercial. Sales for commercial are certainly a lot less. So from 2016 to 2018, there's been about 330 some sales. About 30% of those were disclosed to us. Our AV ratio is about 95% for commercial. So let's move on to personal property here. I'm just kind of banging through here for the sake of time. But personal property is comprised of a lot of things, including mobile homes. We got the business inventory, airlines. We got equipment. Oil and gas is another big one. So let's take a look at what those are comprised of. So the blue here, we got the light blue and dark blue. That's business. That counts for over 90% of the value in that. And then we have oil and gas property. Oil and gas is largely going to be inventory that's sitting as of January 1st. Like I said, that lien date. It's probably destined to somewhere not in Anchorage, probably to the North Slope, maybe down south. And then you have the two reds here, which is the mobile homes. And those are both just as many accounts as business, but as you can see here, they're not really as much. Total assessed value for last year for personal property was about 2.8, almost $2.9 billion.
Do you not include personal aircraft?
Personal aircraft is included here, and there's actually a specific method that we use to assess this. Yeah, because it gets complicated. When a plane lands and then goes somewhere else, as of January 1st, it could be somewhere else. So they're all over the state. But there's a certain method that we we have to do by code or statute.
By code, but
Yeah.
he's talking about airliners. Light planes are not taxed by the city.
Why not? When you're taxing mobile homes, why aren't you taxing personal aircraft?
I couldn't tell you. The decision was made long before my time.
Sure,
but,
sure. Okay, I was curious if there was a particular reason.
Yeah, we can certainly look into that.
But that's driven by municipal ordinance, the airplane, personal aircraft
Right,
not being
that would be-
taxed, right?
Be accepted.
Yeah.
A small aircraft, I'm not sure.
I have to get a personal property guy in here.
Yeah, that's okay. I was just curious. It wasn't mentioned, and I thought if you're taxing a mobile home, planes as mobile as a mobile home. Curious.
It's a good question.
We can get definitely send you guys.
Yeah,
an
it'd be
email.
kind of interesting to find out why that is.
Are boats in?
No, and I believe that's a state issue. I think that's a state statute. Probably don't touch boats. Personal property, as far as the audits go, so very similar to what we did with the residential exemption review. We also, on an annual basis, do audits on personal property accounts. We go back up to 6 years on the audits. Last year, we had about $11.1 billion in adjusted value to taxable value. And at the end of the day, all we're trying to do is get value right. So yes, some years the taxable value went up, but in other years, for example, 2017, it went down. Again, we're just trying to get it right. Okay, so what's next? So, like you said, one of the first slides I introduced as far as the timeline of what we're doing, where we are. Right now, we're in our appeal period. So again, the appeal deadline has passed. But I want to talk a little bit about this as far as what's going on. This is where the earthquake stuff starts to come into place. So here's the number of appeals by year. It's not just appeals, it's also corrected assessments, where basically we look at and say, yes, we made an error, we'll give you a new evaluation notice. You now have an additional 30 days to appeal. And also that shows the blue, which is kind of direct contacts. As you can see, things have been kind of going downhill for a while, which has been beneficial. But this last year, it certainly ticked up a lot. And I think a lot of the reason is the earthquake. So, let's take a look at that. So as far as the earthquake goes, there's a few things that have happened since the November 30th earthquake. The first one is that there's actually an ordinance that has been adopted. And there's really two things that impact us, property appraisal, directly. The first is they said that appeals to the Board of Equalization, that owners can now, if they have earthquake damage to their house, they have effectively an additional 30 days to file an appeal. That deadline will be coming up here quickly, about March 18th. The next one is, I think, what I'm going to focus most attention on, which is correction of error. So essentially what the ordinance said is that if the assessor fails to notice significant damage from the earthquake, that could be considered a error, and the assessor may issue a new valuation and go forward from there. So the whole notion and intent of this is this earthquake happened essentially in the winter. Come springtime, things start to thaw out. You might say, oh my gosh, I have actually foundation damage that I have no idea I have. So that's really the intent of it. And so back to this chart here, if I can actually let this go. Back to this chart here, the corrected assessments of 472 right now. That may certainly pick up this next year. So that's certainly a big, I should say, uncertainty with respect to that. So right now, as far as things go, like I said, we have about $30 million adjustment to just corrected assessments. As far as appeals go, we're in the early stages. We're just starting to contact the property owners who have appealed. I can tell you that the average adjustment for residential, if it's earthquake related, it's been about $80,000. So not something to sneeze at as far as that goes. And I think right now of the appeals that we have, which is about 680, I think I said, 689, about 30% of those are earthquake related. So, and that may change as we start to really work closely with those appeals, and the problems may manifest a bit more. So, other than that, I tried to kind of really go through this really quick. I'll just kind of leave it up for questions, but I appreciate your time. It's a super high overview level, so I understand.
Charlotte?
One of the things that has actually been brought in front of the BAC in previous years is the inequity, you might say, between the east side and the south side in appraising the land values. So I went through, is it Bright? Who's the gentleman?
Brian.
Brian?
Brian.
And he showed me the formula that you guys use and all the different things that you take into consideration. And I understand it's an incredibly complicated and cumbersome process. It looks like it is. But the fact is that a house in Nunaka Valley is actually taxed higher than a house that backs up to Kincaid Park. And I've still never had a good explanation for why. Bryant said that it was because of amenities. And that's why they were paying more taxes in Nunaka Valley than they were on the west side. So,
So are you talking like the mill rate, effective mill rate by tax?
you remember when I brought this up
I
before?
do, but
I don't know if it was the mill sheep. They pay more per square foot taxes than somebody who, the example that we pulled out was somebody whose house backed up to Kincaid Park.
Okay.
The explanation came down to, well, you have better bus service. It's easier for you to get to a grocery store. I mean, these are kind of crazy when you're talking about an area that has a low socioeconomic population as a whole, as opposed to somebody whose house sits on Kincaid Park, who probably is not of the same, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I guess right now, I won't be able to answer that question. And one of the things that I see is every kind of situation and scenario has a story that you really have to dig into. And I think this one I would certainly, to answer, I would have to dig into it.
It seems like the larger the lot that the house sits on, the lower the taxes. Does that make any sense?
I would say it's a general thing that the bigger the lot, the price per square foot will generally go down. And it's really kind of based on the theory of utility. You buy a lot, whether it's an 8,000 square foot lot or 15,000 square foot, you're probably going to put most of that utility of that lot is to build a house on it.
Right.
And so the 8,000 square foot lot is sufficient to build a house on, and the 15,000 square foot lot. And so that's really one of the things that we try to do within property appraisal, is really to try to recognize that, which really is the market driving those decisions.
I want to hear from the boys in the back.
Because they're all.
If you, the law of diminishing returns, you have let's say you have a 100,000 square foot lot, and it's worth $1 million, and you subdivide it into smaller lots. Those smaller lots, the total value of those smaller lots will be much more than $1 million you started with. That's why you do a subdivision. And that goes for houses that are, smaller lots generally have a higher price per square foot, but as you get into bigger and bigger lots, that price per square foot is down. The tax actually is higher for the other properties, the tax itself, but the price per square foot changes.
So it's a difference in the market value. I mean, and the assessment models are mimicking market value, and the market value is really what's driving a tax difference in what she's talking about, probably, right?
Right. Yeah, the taxes are actually higher, but the price per square foot that they're paying on is lower.
But you can understand, so obviously you all know I'm a member of Northeast Community Council, you can understand where residents of the east side are saying, wait a minute, why, I live in a little 700 square foot house in Nunaka Valley, and I'm paying more per square foot than someone who lives in a 3,000 square foot house.
I think the challenge there, though, is that per square foot is a really tricky metric.
Yeah.
I understand the emotional argument of it, and I understand the logical argument of it, but per square foot is also a really tricky subject. So I live in a subdivision where the houses are 1,400 square feet to 2,100 square feet. Now, my house happens to be a 2,000 square foot house. Because of the type of subdivision that I live in, I get a much lower value per square foot if I were to go and sell my house than somebody who's at 1,400. If I were to get what that person at 1,400 is getting per square foot, the value of my house would actually be what somebody is paying for a wholly different style of house in a much better neighborhood. And so per square foot when it comes to real estate is a really, really tricky thing. My guess is that person is actually paying less in taxes overall, but if they use the per square foot metric because of all of these vagaries, it doesn't seem like it lines up. And that is not uncommon in real estate issues.
So I live in one of those 700 square foot Nunaka houses too, and it's probably the market that's discriminating against us more than these guys. That's my guess.
Well,
but I think we do need to move on because we've got we're kind of limited. And so,
Yes.
do we have other questions for these guys?
really quick, if I might
Yes.
just say though, their excuse at that point was, you have better amenities.
Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like that floats very well.
Right.
But those are taken into an account when you guys are doing your formulas, right? The amenities.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I think that certainly is gonna be,
Yeah,
your
Jeff.
tax district too.
I feel like I still got a lot to learn about how all of this works. How big is the team at the tax assessor's office? And I had heard stories about the department hiring auditors a couple years ago to look into senior property tax exemptions. What did that involve? And are there other areas that you see as maybe a deficiency that could be filled by hiring staff? Like, what are your needs?
So I think right now, I'll be really quick on this, 35 seconds. We're looking into actually scaling up the exemption review, just from an equity standpoint. I think that would be really beneficial. As far as our staff goes, we're about 35 right now. And right now, the biggest thing is our customer service is certainly, they're busy to say the least. So.
Historically, we're right now basically at our low point. We've had, I think I've been here 23 years. I think at one point we had over 50 people. That may have been too many, but in my opinion, as I'm getting ready to retire and have that happen, we should be more than 34.
Question on slide number 6 that you had was the exemptions by type, and
Yes.
you listed out, the mandatory state ones, senior, disabled vets, municipality, and so forth. It comes up constantly. I mean, I'm sure you deal with this all the time about people saying like, well, what are the exemptions that are being, where they're not accurate, they shouldn't be getting them, so on and so on. Is there actually rich hunting grounds within those exemptions to identify cases where people are claiming an exemption that they shouldn't be getting? I think this comes up a lot. A lot. I mean, this comes up constantly, and in this committee and this commission in the past, it's come up a lot.
Yeah, I think so. This exemption review is certainly where we think there's most to gain from it. So again, that's going to be residential, senior, disabled veterans. And if you look at that 2.3 billion as senior disabled veterans, there's a lot of them. Residential, 2.1 billion, I believe there's 46,000, Jerry, something like that roughly, of residential exemptions. So it's not just a little, And then like I said, pointing out municipality, education, federal, those are pretty straightforward. A lot of these governments, they're going to be fully exempt as far as that goes. So really, and I think the main ones to focus on are the senior, disabled, vet, residential. But there's certainly, reviewing all of them is certainly important too. Does that at least help answer your question?
Sure. Yeah, it's actually.
So maybe a little off topic, but it certainly comes up in my neighborhood a lot. I live in Mountain View, where people are talking about people on fixed incomes not being able to pay their property tax. And do you guys track how many people lose their homes for inability to pay property tax? And
The Treasury would, but we don't in Tropic Grayson.
I do know that it's a very high rate of people paying. So I believe it's well in the 90s, high 90s, 98, 99%, I believe, the people that are able to pay. So, but treasurer.
Other questions?
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, this is very,
Is it possible to get a copy of this presentation?
Lila sent it to you while you were sitting here.
Perfect, thanks.
then I think we have. There it is. Well, we don't have a report from the assembly.
No.
Then.
Chicken.
We can move on to school board report.
I don't have, Mr. Donnelly's not here, but I don't know if these guys have anything they
I
want to
believe
add.
you've heard enough
You've
of us
heard it.
over the last.
Then in that case, Lance, what do you have from?
Real quick, the administration sent out guidance to directors a week ago Wednesday. We needed guidance from departments to look at some potential reductions in 19 due to the governor's budget. They were due to us yesterday. OMB is reviewing and revising those. We'll be meeting with the mayor. And as 18 closes, we'll bring that together with the proposals from the departments. And then we will be submitting our proposed budget to the assembly on the 9th of April. So you guys will meet before we give it to them. So depending on the administration's decision-making process, I'll get a chance to share that with you before we give it to the assembly. I hope we can do that. We will be a little further along. The next Assembly's Budget and Finance Committee is the 21st of this month. We'll probably have a lot more information available, which we will be sharing with them on potentially our fund balance, our 18 close, and whether departments are coming in on how we're going to close the gap if we lose all of the revenue sharing and some of the Medicaid support that we get from others. It can leave a significant hole in our budget, but that's where we are. So your April meeting will be focused primarily on 1Q. And then I think probably either later or in May, we'll be talking about spending limit. We'll be talking about other those things, rocking right on after that. So that's all I have for you, Mr. Chairman.
So in future meetings, since we're, is there anything that we feel like, Lance talked and kind of mapped out the next couple months of our meetings, but is there anything that we should modify in terms of what we focus on for our future meetings? Is that something that anybody's interested in? As far as what topics we devote our meetings to?
Just timing would be really helpful to be able to sort of put a resolution, send a resolution to the assembly before they vote on something after
I
they
get that.
When we're given a chance. Just timing,
Yeah.
And
Yep,
I
no.
understand that's not always possible.
I think you guys brought that up, and we're going to try to do that as much as we can. We also recognize that sometimes you won't get that opportunity
Yeah,
to do it. It'll be after the fact, and that's just the way it works. But the work program that you have, the schedule by month that we put together, and I'm going to try and note what the priority topic is for your next month, so you're a little bit ahead of that. I'm working to get the agendas to you more timely upon review, so we're working to expedite it.
Just very quickly, when we had our strategic planning session, Lance said after me, kind of surprised that the port didn't bubble up a little bit more. And I said I didn't think, we felt like necessarily that we had a role in the port. It's been pretty well studied and so on and so forth. But I think it does raise a good question of, at what point does this organ have a role in kind of, pushing for a solution at some point? Because at some point, the solution becomes it falls into the sea. And then we have to adapt from there. So I'm not, at this point, pushing for changing our work plan for the year, but I think it was a very good question to ask of what role do we have in what really is the biggest long-term issue the city faces, right, which is the port. So
That's a good point. The port does kind of drive, at least from what I've been at, the Joint Utilities Committee meetings for the Assembly. Those are worth attending if you're interested in that subject. They usually happen right before the Budget Committee meetings.
Yep, and as briefings come out, if you guys are interested, we'll make them available to you if they are available. I'll give them to Lila and we'll get them sent to you, particularly on the port.
Yeah. All right. Then anything else? We make a motion to adjourn. All right.
Thank you, everyone. So guys, before you take off, I have to